€660 for a rear mech? Almost €600 for a cassette, €120 for a chain. Are these the hidden costs that are making e-bikes more expensive to maintain? Let's dig in. Some years ago, Steve did a great film all about the real cost of living with an EMTB. Now, to say it was contentious would be a bit of an understatement. Anyway, we thought we'd revisit that topic, just in light of the new innovations in terms of drivetrain, the new innovations in suspension, and that pesky thing inflation, which unfortunately infects everything that we want to buy, whether it be the cost of materials, the cost of shipping. So let's kick things off with a great comment from the last video from Steve from Houdini, Hawaii. Great name. He says, I consider my e-bike a little hole in the dirt where I just pour money. It's more relevant to ask, how many smiles to the dollar am I getting? And it's a really good point. I mean, before we dive into any details, I think it's really important to say that how you use your EMTB is going to be different to how other people are, and that's really going to impact costs. So, a once-a-week forest ride in a hot climate is probably going to impact your ride less than someone who's riding all the time in really wet and sloppy conditions. So, I guess the big bottom line is it depends. It depends and it depends. It depends on so much. How much you ride is massive. How you ride is going to make an impact. Where you ride, what the conditions are, the components that you're replacing or you're not replacing in time, and of course the bike you're riding is going to be a big factor, and we'll dive into all of these details next. We went out and about to get some real-world scenarios. First up is Garreth from the Pedalabikeaway Centre in the Forest of Dean.
We've worked out that the average ride is usually around about 20 kilometres. So what's that? 20 kilometres is about probably, what, 14 miles, isn't it? And so the average ride goes out for about 14 miles. So you only kind of work out how many rides it's going out over the year or over the 6-month period. Usually looking around about 80 or so rides, 85 rides around 14 miles in length. So I think there's obviously broken down two kind of like main costs to it. There's the cost, obviously, of the parts and the components that you're going to use on the bike, and then obviously the cost of the labour as well. So you know, the parts per month, we're probably spending around about £75 to £90 a month on the in terms of parts, and that's generally things like, for example, chains, brake pads. You're going to go through obviously a couple of sets every month, and then gear cables, and then obviously on top of that you've got the bigger kind of services where you're talking then, you know, replacing tyres, replacing cassettes, replacing chain rings, and obviously suspension servicing you're doing every 6 months or so. So all in, we're looking probably around £2,000, £2,200 a year if we were talking at retail. Obviously, we employ the mechanics, so we're looking around probably £1,100 a year per bike for a bike that's going out for about 2,000 miles.
Really interesting insights there from Gareth. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that those are hire fleet bikes, so they're going to be used and abused like rentals. So they're going to have a really wide spectrum of users, and unfortunately some of those riders aren't going to be as skillful, so they're going to be smashing through the gears. And also it's worth bearing in mind that they're getting lots and lots of mileage every single day. So the more they're doing, the more maintenance they're probably going to have to do. One area that we didn't chat with Gareth about, but we did chat with Jake about, is suspension, because that's a big aspect of your servicing costs. So here's Jake from Sprung Suspension, also in the Forest of Dean.
So it doesn't cost more to service suspension on an e-bike compared to a normal bike, but what we do need to watch out for is it's so easy to rack up the hours on an e-bike, so you will need to do it more often. Officially, service interval is about 100 hours. The way we do it is that if you ride 2 hours a week, there's 52 weeks in a year, so that's 100 hours. So if you ride 2 hours a week, you want to do it once a year. If you're riding 4 hours a week, that's every 6 months. 8 hours a week, it's every 3 months. So it's pretty easy to rack the time up on an e-bike compared to a normal bike. So talking about the cost, generally it's going to be about 120 quid an end. So 120 quid for the fork, 120 quid for the shock. There's a bit of variation depending on what model you've got, but that's generally going to be the benchmark. Yeah, it's pretty similar between Fox and RockShox. I mean, between any brand, it's all pretty similar now. A full service involves fully stripping the fork or shock down to like every component part. We check it thoroughly for any damage, any wear, anything that's going to cause a reliability issue going forwards. We replace all the seals in the unit, rebuild it, fresh nitrogen if it needs it, because a lot of them are nitrogen charged. and then we give it a good thorough test. So we know that when that focal shock leaves us, it's absolutely mint.
Some really interesting insights from Jake. I've kind of worked with Jake in the past at World Cup Downhill, so he really knows what he's talking about. So for me, I think it was interesting that he was saying the overall service is about 100 hours. So some suspension units are as low as 30 hours, and that's for an air can or a lower leg service. Most are around 50, but still those costs apply. So interesting insights. So what are the other factors? Well, type of riding really is the big one, isn't it? And where and how you're riding. Got a great comment here from the TARDIS, I think it is. We'll go with that. So he says, I think it really depends on the riding style. I'm someone who likes riding easy local trails and can spend £200 to £300 a year, where someone else going for big jumps, descending hard and beating the shit out of your bike might need to replace the whole thing once or twice a year. Very true. Now, Garreth briefly touched on this topic. He was talking about how much he has to pay to maintain his bikes versus how much a punter would have to pay. And it's a really valid thing. If you're able to fix your bike at home, you could save yourself quite a lot of money. Great comment here though. The way I look at it is if you can afford an expensive bike, you can afford to run it. Or get handy with the spanners. There's a YouTube video for everything. Now, hopefully there is a YouTube video either on EMBN or GMBN Tech where we've got lots of how-tos, but if there's a how-to or another problem that you need to fix on your EMTB, let us know in the comments below. We can hopefully make some content that will help save you some money. That's the industry insights, but what have you said? Let's dive into some of the comments from the previous video. Mr. Wombat75 says he'd spend about £150 a year. He'd go through 4 chains, cassettes, rear tyre, brake pads. Interestingly, he says, I also shop around for the best deal on cassettes and chains. So if one's on sale and it fits my bike, then I might buy them in bulk. He's bought cassettes in the past at 40% off. So shopping around seems to be key. Vadik Ram has got some really great comments here. So he rides 6 months in the year and he rides almost every day, apart from when it rains. He does around 5,000 miles in this season, and this is what he gets through in that season. So 1 full suspension service at the start of the season, so oils, all the pivots are greased, a new set of tyres, new set of brake pads, 1 cassette and 2 chains. So we're going to cut through. There's a lot of comments. That's just 2 out of literally hundreds that we've seen. And it seems the big takeaway points is that the wear items, so your chain, your cassette, brake pads, tyres, maybe suspension bearings and suspension systems, are all just still wear items. So shopping around for these parts can really help save you money, so potentially buying in bulk if your local shop has got a promo on them, and it seems doing the work or as much as you can at home can really save you. Okay, we've heard the industry insights and we've heard your fantastic comments, but what about me? Time for my opinion, I feel. So, little brief background, I'm an ex-World Cup mechanic. I also work here at GCN and GMBN and EMBN and GTN, so I see a true cornucopia of different bikes. And for me, I think it's fascinating that the wear parts are these critical bits that we keep talking about needing replacing and being one of the hidden costs. And as an example, we've got, well, do you replace like for like? And what options do you have? So we've got 2 examples here. This is Steve's Canyon Strive Fabian Barrel Edition. Gorgeous bike, I've got to say, really stunning. It is about 9 grand. But that sticker price is only one part of the picture. The other part is the T-type transmission that it comes with. So the rear derailleur is around 660 euros. It's spendy. You've got another almost 500 euros for the cassette, 120 euros for the chain. Now we know from your comments and industry insight that these are wear items, so it's going to get expensive. So what other options are there? Well, we've got another example here, which is another one of bikes that Jonesy's ridden and ridden quite a lot, and that's his Spectral on CF8. He's ridden it in Italy quite recently. So sticker price is a lot lower. It's still spendy, it's 5,400 approximately. But that drivetrain, that's the critical thing that we're seeing as a wear item. So on that, you've still got 12 speed, so it's still an up-to-date drivetrain. Okay, it's using cables versus clever wireless magic, but a rear mech for that 12-speed bike is only going to cost you about 85 quid. A cassette, 115. A chain, just under 30 quid. That's a fourth of the cost of the T-type system. So there is a massive difference in price. Is there a massive difference in performance? Well, for Jonesy, not really. I mean, I guess the big thing is if you get the really expensive part or the higher performing but lower cost part, they're both going to be affected by the maintenance schedule that you do, so what lubricant, what washing process that you do, and the environment that you're riding. To be fair, we've seen Axis RMX last for over 5,000 miles, so they can be long lasting. However, Shimano Link Glide, and this is their figures, not our own, they're saying that their Link Glide cassette, which is available in a couple of different tiers, can last 3 times longer. It is a little bit heavier, but 3 times more durable is a real take home. So do we need the top tier super light race stuff on an EMTB? Do we need that 1052 mega range cassette? Personally, I don't think we do. Obviously the choice is yours, but the facts are there. One drivetrain is going to cost you a lot more to replace than the other. Which one will you go for? So, more comments from you guys, and this is about intensity of use. We've got a great comment here from Bikealyptus. He thinks that we should talk more about cost per 1,000 kilometres, not per year. I think you've got a valid point there. As you mentioned, it depends on where and how much you ride. For me, the most important thing is cleaning and lubing, especially the drivetrain, which leads us into cleaning. We've got a comment here from Cybri. How you clean your EMTB after a wet, muddy ride will also enhance or negate its longevity. I can't agree more. We've done a specific video on how to jet wash your bike, and it's not point blank range with a motocross pressure washer where you're stripping the paint off. So watch that. I feel that the more care and time you can take to clean your drivetrain especially, it's just going to make your drivetrain last longer. So making sure it's really clean and re-lubed again is going to pay off in the long run. One thing we've not mentioned is, well, electricity, which for an e-bike is fairly critical. We've got a great comment here from JHHX9kg. Strange that no one mentions the estimated energy costs in their comments. Well, we've done a little bit of maths, and the maths might be wrong, but it's just to give us an idea and a flavour of what those costs are. So Neil's Roxon Edition bike is very nice. It's got a 900 watt-hour battery. And just going off sort of my nominal unit price for electricity, that's here in the UK, that's 24.5p per kilowatt hour. So we run the maths on that, and we can show that on screen because I'm not very good at maths and we'll have to do that thinking face. But essentially, if he's riding 2 rides where he empties the battery fully per week, and we do that kind of all year, it's about 25 quid. So yes, the electricity costs are there and they are a factor, but they're not as much as you might think. Okay, time for more of my insights. And we're going to look at wheels and tyres, we're going to look at brake pads and suspension. So with wheels and tyres, yeah, the type of wheels that your stock bike might come with, they might not be e-specific. And okay, e-specific feels like a sticker that's bandied around a lot, but there are e-bike specific wheels out there, and they've got bigger bearings, they've got bigger spline interfaces to help transfer that power, and they've often got much stronger rims. Tyres. Rich has done a fantastic video on why the Pirelli e-bike tyres, and other e-bike tyres as well, are a really good investment. You've got a much stronger carcass, you've got different rubber compounds, and they do last longer. I'm going to put my kind of 50 pence worth in, and that's tyre inserts. They are controversial. I've had comments before where people don't like them and say they're expensive, but just before filming this, I looked and you could get a kind of green adjustable foam sponge one from Vittoria for under 40 quid. And seeing as e-bike tyres and mountain bike tyres in general are running at almost 90 quid for one, I think it's a really good investment. Not only can they protect the tyre, but they can also protect your rim from really critical failure. So yeah, they are a bit of faff to fit. They can be a bit of a faff if you have a really serious puncture, but you can run them as a run flat to get home. Brake pads. Okay, brake pads could be a whole video in itself. Essentially, we've got resin and we've got sintered or metal as they're called. For me, I think if you're switching out to run the sintered or metal ones, it's worth the investment. The pads do last longer. Okay, there's some slight drawbacks. They can feel a little bit more wooden. They can be grabbier, so you have to kind of change how you brake, but they do last, especially in wet conditions, a lot longer. Suspension servicing. So Jake talked about this and talked about a 100-hour sort of service interval. That's a complete service for the suspension unit, suspension forks, or the rear shock. Many brands do have a lower timeline for this service interval. So Fox, I think, run at 30, RockShox around 50 hours, and that's for a lower leg service or air can service. And Jake's talking about doing a complete rebuild. But I think the big take home is that if you're doing this kind of maintenance before stuff goes wrong, personally, as a race mechanic, I think it's well worth doing. You're spending a little not to have to replace a whole suspension fork or a whole rear shock. But we've got comments. We've got your comments on this too. So we've got GDDDHF, almost juicy, and he's saying, in the interest of sustainability and minimising waste, people should really be riding their components until failure, or until they're visibly unsafe to keep riding. I'm going to say no, please don't do that. If you're riding them and you can see that they're physically worn out, that's really not a good thing, because if you're out in the middle of nowhere, or you're just out somewhere local and something fails in a catastrophic way, it's not great, and it is going to be more expensive. If you can't stop and you crash your bike into a tree, it's going to get a lot more expensive than if you just replaced those brake pads earlier. So another thing here is from Thomas. He's saying nobody's bothering to service their nice suspension at the recommended intervals. Well, Jake is saying that you should. I'm saying that you should as well. So yes, it is more expense. However, it is going to be cheaper in the long run because you're not going to have to pay for a whole new fork or a whole new shock. Right, let's have a look at some other maintenance issues that are going to be out there. So, other maintenance, well, it's not really maintenance, it's breakages. And we got a great comment here. Power Tapping says, I commented on the first video and in my update, I wanted to include the cost of breakages. I ride pretty hard in the mountains, a combo of DH, Enduro and technical single track, and he's destroyed 2 derailleurs. Yeah, I mean, look, if you're crashing and you're riding really hard, you are going to break more stuff. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of mountain biking, whether it's on an EMTB or a regular mountain bike. But I'll say this, yeah, rear mechs are expensive. Mech hangers are less expensive, so make sure that you've got a mech hanger. What about alternative options? Maybe you're already firing up to type on the keyboard. You're right, all we've talked about is traditional chain and derailleur setups, but there are other options out there, and we've got a great comment here from Digital Done Right. He's talking about he rides cross country and he's got a Gates belt drive, so that's kind of like a belt system that you would see in a car engine, and he's got a roll-off internal hub. So these are an amazing hub gear. They're not like the Sturmey Archer that you would have had in the past, opposed to just 3 speeds or maybe a 5 speed. This thing's 12 or 13 speed. You can even get a Di2 wireless operated one. So he's saying it's super expensive, but he has nearly zero maintenance, which is really, really interesting. Feeding off that, Simon has said the original video is one of his gripes about e-bikes. The industry has just adapted bicycle components. So for him, he's using an e-bike to try and reduce unnecessary car use. So, and because he wants to ride his bike a lot, he wants us to kind of introduce much improved wear rates and servicing intervals that are more like cars. So he's saying, his car is serviced 20,000 miles, brakes and tyres last around the same distance, and a transmission is good for 100,000 miles plus. You've got a very good car and you must drive very gently. I think you've got really valid points. I think the problem that we're going to have with trying to introduce really, really long service intervals is that we do have to ride the bikes, and I know that they are an e-bike and they are kind of boosting us round, but weight is still a factor. So if we went down the automotive route, I fear that we'd have humongous disc brake rotors that would be really, really thick and really heavy. But it's really interesting to have some comments about, do we need to introduce industry-wide standards for full service intervals? Interesting thoughts. So one factor about EMTBs that is different from a regular mountain bike is, well, the battery and motor. And it's another cost. We've done a whole video on how if your e-bike motor dies, it's not the end of it. No, and actually you can get it serviced as well. So the eBike Motor Centre, great video that we've done with them, talks about the pricing of servicing lots of different components. So Bosch start from 257 quid, Yamaha, similar starting point. And okay, the prices go up to almost 400 quid, but So it is an additional expense, but I think it's not as expensive as you might think to get your motor serviced. So interesting point, it is going to be an additional cost and it is going to be a running cost, but it's not sky high, is it? Okay, time for more of my insights, and potentially this is going to be the most controversial aspect. This is my conclusions to this whole debate, so get your fingers ready to type some comments. Hopefully they're positive, but we'll listen to all of them. So I feel that yes, EMTBs over regular MTB are going to cost a little bit more. We know that the wear items are going to be similar, so if you ride more, you're going to have to replace your chain, your cassette, all those wear items like brake pads more often. If you ride really aggressively and you're on the edge of traction and you crash more, well, you're going to break more parts and it's probably going to be more expensive. However, for me, the extended experience, the extended adventure and escape out in nature is worth it. It's really fantastic. So if an e-bike keeps you out on the bike and keeps you active when the grim weather would stop you getting out, or it keeps you active when there's other barriers that might otherwise limit your outdoor experience on a bike, it's worth it. Just try it. It's worth the extra mild additional cost.